The 4% retirement rule has chained thousands of Americans to their jobs years longer than necessary. And here's the irony: even the guy who created it doesn't follow it himself. As a retirement planner, I've seen too many people delay the life they want because they're stuck on a rule built for worst case scenarios. So, in this video, I'll show you why the 4% rule could be holding you back and the strategy we use with clients that may help you retire sooner and spend more while you can truly enjoy it. Let's get into it. Let's quickly review how the 4% rule actually works. It suggests that retirees can safely withdraw 4% of their total portfolio balance in the first year of retirement and then adjust that amount annually for inflation. The idea is that this withdrawal rate should sustain a 30-year retirement without depleting your savings. Sounds reasonable, right? But here's the problem. This rule creates impossibly high retirement targets that convince successful people they're nowhere near ready when they actually are. Think about what this means in real numbers. If you need $100,000 a year in retirement, this rule says you need $2.5 million saved. You need $150,000, you're looking at $3.75 million. These targets are so intimidating that I regularly meet with people who have $2 million saved but think that they're still years away from retirement because some calculator told them they needed much, much more. But here's what's troubling. This rule was designed to survive the absolute worst 30-year period in market history. We're talking about a strategy built around a worst case historical sequence. And believe it or not, Bill Bengen, who created this rule, doesn't follow it himself. Instead of the 50-50 stock bond allocation, he uses a much more aggressive one and withdraws at 4.9%, not 4%. So if the creator abandoned his own formula, why are millions of Americans still chained to it? This approach comes at a massive cost. Each additional year you work represents irreplaceable time that could be spent enjoying retirement, traveling while you're healthy, or being present for family milestones. It's not just about you being conservative, you're actually trading your best years of your life for money you may never spend. And this whole problem gets even worse when you consider the 4% rule's second major flaw. It treats retirement like you're a robot with identical needs for 30 straight years. But that's not how real retirement works. In fact, think about your own life right now. Do you spend the exact same amount every month, adjusted only for inflation? Of course not. Some months you travel, other months you might stay home, and major renovations are not a years long process, although it can feel like it sometimes. Yet, the 4% rule assumes constant withdrawals throughout retirement. What researchers call the retirement spending smile shows that real retirement spending follows a pattern: higher in earlier active years, lower in middle years, and higher again later because of healthcare costs. And what I consistently see among my clients matches this research perfectly. Everyone intuitively knows that they don't spend the exact same amount or have the identical energy every year throughout their entire retirement. And the 4% rule ignores the fact that healthcare costs rise much faster than regular inflation. So you're planning for the wrong future. This inflexibility creates two devastating problems. First, it forces you to oversave for scenarios that don't match real life spending patterns. And second, and more tragically, it makes people underspend during their healthiest, most active years. I had a client, I'll call her Margaret, who came to me at 63 years old. And despite having $2.8 million saved, she was living on $85,000 a year because the 4% rule had her terrified she was going to run out of money. She was essentially hoarding wealth for a 95-year-old version of herself who may never need it, missing out on taking the European boat cruise she had dreamed of because she was trapped by a rule that ignored her actual circumstances. Now, I will say there is one legitimate concern that the 4% rule attempts to address, called the sequence of returns risk. This is simply the danger that poor market performance early in retirement can permanently damage your portfolio because you're withdrawing money during the downturn. Now, imagine two retirees with identical portfolios and identical long-term returns, but one experiences poor markets early in retirement while the other enjoys strong initial performance. The outcomes can be dramatically different even with the same average returns over time. But here's how the 4% rule's rigidity becomes dangerous rather than protective. If the market drops, say 20+% in your second year of retirement, the rule says, well, just keep withdrawing the same amount. You're forced to sell investments, though, at the worst possible time. And there are some strategies such as the guardrails income strategy you may have heard of, which can help some people, but this thought process actually ties your lifestyle spending to market swings. We prefer for our clients a system that keeps their lifestyle stable in the midst of inevitable market volatility. And this is exactly why you need a different approach, one that can provide consistent cash flow regardless of market conditions. Now, if you're realizing that traditional retirement planning might be keeping you working longer than necessary, I'd love to help analyze your specific situation. You can click the link in the description to book a call with me to see exactly how much you can be spending in retirement. So, what's the alternative? How do you create a retirement strategy that's both flexible enough to handle real life and secure enough to give you confidence? The answer we embrace is the buckets strategy, a time segmented approach that organizes your retirement savings into three distinct purposes, each designed to handle different time horizons and market conditions. Think of it this way: instead of one giant pool of money you're afraid to touch, you create three smaller pools, each with a specific and calculated job. It's like you're going to the optometrist. They don't just hand you generic reader glasses, they test and refine until you get the prescription that's crystal clear for your own eyes. And the same goes for retirement. The 4% rule is like those off the shelf glasses, but the bucket strategy can give you a custom fit for your life. And once that clarity comes into focus, most people realize that they can retire not only sooner, but spend more confidently. So here's how we structure it. Bucket one represents around 6 to 12 months of expenses that go into high yield savings accounts. Whether you need money for groceries, utilities, or eating out, it comes from here. And this bucket eliminates the daily anxiety of, am I spending too much? Because you know exactly where your living expenses are covered. Bucket two, I call the bond storm bunker. And this represents around 4 to 6 years of income needs. And this goes into conservative bond funds and becomes your refuge for cash flow in both good times and bad. It's your protection against market volatility and your bridge to the future. When bucket run is running low, you just refill it from here, just like the paychecks you're used to receiving. Now, when the market is inevitably going to have a bad year, you don't panic because you know you have years of expenses stored in this stable bunker. And then bucket three is your growth engine. This is where all the rest of the assets go to be invested in stock funds for long term growth and inflation protection. This bucket will do the heavy lifting over decades, but you're not depending on it for immediate income, so short term volatility doesn't threaten your lifestyle. And here's what makes this strategy so revolutionary compared to the 4% rule: it allows you to keep far more of your money in growth investments than the traditional 50% stocks and 50% bonds that Bengen originally used. With your short and medium term needs covered by the first two buckets, you can confidently keep much more of your portfolio in stocks for the long term growth. And this isn't reckless, it's strategic. You're not gambling with next year's living expenses, but instead optimizing for decades of growth potential. Because the bucket strategy gives you confidence that your income is secure, most of my clients actually spend a much higher percentage early in retirement rather than the 4% that lets them enjoy more now while they're young. In fact, let me share what happened with a couple I worked with recently. I'll call them John and Susan, who were ages 61 and 59. They had $2.1 million saved and were convinced that they needed to work at least 3 more years to hit their round $2.5 million target, based on some online calculator that they had found. And when we built their bucket strategy, something fascinating emerged. With around $95,000 in annual expense needs, we allocated $100,000 to their immediate cash bucket and then $480,000 to their bond storm bunker, covering, again, about 5 years in stable, accessible funds. This left the other $1.5 million in their growth bucket, significantly more than the 4% rule's recommended 50% stock allocation would suggest. The bucket strategy didn't just give them peace of mind, it gave them clarity. They could exactly see how and where their income would flow month after month, independent of what the stock market was doing. So, this confidence allowed them to retire immediately, not in 3 years. And more importantly, because they had more money working in the growth bucket than the 4% conservative rule would suggest, their long term prospects were actually better. They weren't just retiring earlier, they were setting themselves up for greater lifetime wealth. Now, here's where the bucket strategy becomes even more powerful when combined with realistic spending patterns throughout retirement. You've probably heard about the go go, slow go, and no go phases of retirement spending, which is the reality that people don't maintain identical needs and energy levels from 65 to 95. What I consistently seeing among my clients matches what researchers have documented, where spending follows predictable phases that smart retirees can plan for. In practice, this looks like first the active years, typically your age 60 to 75, where you're healthy, energetic, and checking off items from your bucket list. This is when clients want to travel to Europe, take the kids to Disney World, travel cross country in their RV. And I see people spending at their highest levels during this phase. Next are those transitional years, generally mid 70s to mid 80s, where they're still active, but being less ambitious about big adventures. They're preferring more familiar places, closer to home activities, and I consistently observe spending naturally decrease by 20, even 30% during this phase among our clients. And then third is that care focused years, perhaps mid 80s and beyond, where health becomes the primary concern. My clients are generally spending more on care, but less on everything else. And here's what's fascinating: when you combine the bucket strategy confidence with realistic spending phases, you can often spend significantly more than traditional withdrawal rates would suggest in those crucial early retirement years. Going back to John and Susan's situation, they realized they could spend more on travel in their 60s, knowing expenses would naturally drop in their later years. And this isn't just financial planning, this is life planning. They went from feeling constrained about arbitrary rules to feeling more empowered about being able to actually enjoy their wealth when they have their health. And the beautiful irony is, by understanding and planning for natural spending phases combined with the bucket strategy, they'll likely end up with more money over their lifetime, not less, because they're optimizing for real life instead of those cookie cutter formulas. This is what I mean by working smarter, not harder, to create a personalized plan rather than a one size fits all rule of thumb that isn't representative of how people actually live in retirement. So, how do you actually implement a strategy like this? How do you go from the rigid constraints of the 4% rule to the intelligent flexibility of, say, the bucket approach? First, assess your true retirement spending needs across different phases rather than using a single fixed number. Look at actually what you spend now and adjust for retirement specific changes, and then map that across some realistic life phases. Second, build your buckets based on your comfort level and market conditions, not on just some generic formula. Some people may sleep better with 18 months of expenses in cash, others are comfortable with 8 months instead. The key is creating enough of a buffer that you're not constantly worried about market movements. Third, create specific action thresholds for rebalancing between these buckets. Maybe you refill bucket one instead every quarter. Maybe you move money from your growth bucket to your bond bunker annually during good market years. Having these clear rules removes the emotional decision making when markets inevitably get volatile. And then finally, coordinate this strategy with your other income sources, such as Social Security, pensions, maybe an annuity. And the beauty of this bucket system is that it can work seamlessly with other income streams, often allowing you to delay Social Security for maximum benefit while still living comfortably. So now that you understand why the 4% rule is likely keeping you working years longer than necessary, you can implement a more dynamic retirement strategy that can accelerate your retirement timeline, but also provide greater lifetime income and security. Remember, you don't get to rehearse retirement, it's a live performance. So let's get it right. If you want help determining whether you could retire sooner using these dynamic strategies instead of the rigid 4% rule, click the link in the description to book a call with me, where I'll analyze your specific situation and we can show you how to build a plan that optimizes both your portfolio and your life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.